Good evening, everyone, or morning or afternoon, or whatever time it is when you're watching this. As always, it's Gordon Causey coming to you unscripted this evening from my tiny little corner of southeastern Ontario, Northumberland County. I've already taken care of Candy. Those who've watched my channel before know that I normally start out my videos by giving a TREAT to my dog. And she's still right here, but I've already given it to her. So to dispense with that, before I get rolling, I'm going to be talking about the Ottawa Convoy of 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago. Get down, go lay down. About the Ottawa Convoy of almost 2 years ago. But before I get into it, thank you as always for all the subscriptions to my channel, for all the likes. And if you want to hit that like button, I appreciate it. And if you want to subscribe, you'll find out when I'm doing the next one. I think this will be a decent one because the news that just came out within the past few days, past couple days about what happened. Our federal court has just ruled that the implementation of the Emergency Measures Act was both unwarranted and unreasonable. I'm going to share my screen right now. This is from the Edmonton Journal. Court rules Liberals' use of Emergency Act was unjustified, unreasonable. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the act in the wake of the trucker convoy protests in Ottawa in February 2022. So we're coming up on 2 years ago. The Liberal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act in response to the 2022 Freedom Convoy protests was unreasonable, unjustified, and violated the charter, the federal court has ruled. In a lengthy ruling published Tuesday, federal court justice Richard Mosley found that though the Freedom Convoy protests in early 2022 were causing harm to Canada's economy, trade, and commerce, they did not rise to the level of a threat to national security as defined by the law. This is significant. Are we a country that's a dictatorship, or are we a country that abides by the rule of law? And certainly when it comes to what happened that in February of last year, you have to seriously question whether we're governed by the rule of law. Now I want to get out of this screen share. And I want to go back to, there's another thing that I want to share. And here, I'll bring it up now. And that is, lest anyone forget what was going on in February of 2022. There are many videos that went out at that time. And this is one of the better ones, I think, if I can get it to come up. Okay, here it is. This starts out with Joe Rogan, of all people. He's just a very, here it is.
Your country's in revolt. Do you know about this? Show this video.
I can't help but watch this, and it sends chills down my spine.
Those who refuse will obviously contribution. Qui ne croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi.
I'm sure many have seen these images before.
We have one of the biggest revolutions happening. Right now, there's 50,000 truckers and about 1.4 million people headed to the Parliament in Ottawa, and they're going to stay there until Trudeau resigns or they give us back all of our freedoms and rights.
And this is what's so stirring. See, firefighters. Just how can you not get choked up watching something like that? urban,
God bless
rural.
every single one of you truckers and every single one of you Canadians that are supporting this movement. It's not a fringe. Do not be divided. We stand together. We will win this country back.
I'm gonna let it roll. This thing is amazing. And I'm getting choked up watching it again.
I was at a point where I was giving Canada, and you guys are giving me hope. You guys are giving us strength. You guys are keeping us going. And wow, you're one big team, one big national team. The entire world is watching us. I firmly believe this is our last stand, and we are not coming home until you are all free. Small fringe minority holding unacceptable the views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians. This Trudeau has changed the face of this country, so that's what brought me here. We're all Canadians, we're all
A part of our history. If you haven't seen that before, I'm going to include the link down below, as well as a link to the article. But that just fills me up to see that, remembering what it was like. I think in Ontario, it started in September of 2021, so September 21st. I know the date well. September 21st was the first day in Ontario that the vaccine passport system came into effect, which basically meant that an individual such as myself, that I could not sit down in a Tim Hortons to have a simple cup of coffee. I was not allowed to get onto a train or onto an airplane. People lost their jobs. And what the impetus for the convoy protest was the imposition of vaccine requirements on basically the trucking industry, and truckers stood up. I was out on a local overpass. In my small little rural area, we have only two overpasses, one which connects to the 401 and one which does not. One's just an overpass with no exit or off ramps. And on each of those two overpasses, there were around 50 people at the one I was at. And according to a pastor friend of mine who was on the other overpass, there was a similar number there, 50 or so. And this is a very small little town, and it was cold, but it was heartwarming. I was waving a Canadian flag. I was waving a sign that said, no more lockdowns. And a large segment of Canadians had enough. Not all, but a large segment, far beyond what our moronic prime minister would call a fringe minority. And who is he to deem what views are acceptable and what views are not acceptable in a democracy? For a government leader to deem that your views are not acceptable in this Reich, that is frightening. And in that video montage, it showed some little children, probably 7, 8, 9 years of age, being asked, do you think that vaccines should be obligatory, mandatory, required? Oui. Good little certain type of youth I won't say the word. And I myself did not go to Ottawa. I got firsthand accounts on the experience from people I actually know. A friend here in town went, a family of 5, mom, dad, 3 boys. They went down, said it was the most incredible experience. They described it as a carnival type atmosphere. And a lot of Canadians, though, I'm not going to say percentages, a lot of Canadians, though, were horrified at the prospect of this convoy. It scared the bejeebers out of them because the science, or at least what we were told was the science, said that an activity like this was dangerous. And oh my God, you're going to kill us all. And you had, I don't know how many people were in Ottawa, or it would swell into, I believe, the tens of thousands on the weekends. It was heartwarming. And certainly when you looked at the support that was garnered along the roadways, the overpasses, and rural, suburban, urban, people had had enough. And again, the impetus for that convoy protest was the imposition of the vaccine passport system on truckers. And truckers said no, and millions of Canadians did not want to get the shots. And that's simply fact, because if 90+% of us if everyone had gone to get the shots, there would have been no need to impose a vaccine passport system and these other draconian mandates, such as no job, no jab, no job, no jab, no travel, no jab, no sitting down in a restaurant, taking your kid to hockey. And it was because so many Canadians had refused, I would submit, that is the reason the vaccine passport was brought in. But I wanted to bring up one other thing for anyone watching this who may, it was thinking that, it was justified, and who sided with our disgusting racist Prime Minister, Captain Blackface Justin Trudeau. If anyone would take his side of that, I'm going to share something else from my screen. And this is from, wrong tab. Here we go. This is ourcommons.ca. It's a Government of Canada website. I will include the link down below. And this is Anthony Housefeather, Member of Parliament for Mount Royal. That's West Island, Montreal, Mount Royal, or maybe even downtown, I'm not sure. But I know it is Quebec, and I know it is Montreal area, at least, if not Montreal proper. And this was published on February 16th, 2023. So this is a year after the convoy. And what's taking place is there is a committee looking at the contracts that were granted to, or that the government of Canada signed with the vaccine manufacturers, with the Pfizer's, Moderna's, and AstraZeneca's of the world. And there was a debate going on about why members of Parliament were denied access to these contracts unless they would sign a non-disclosure agreement, meaning they could see it, but then they would not be able to just talk about it publicly. And the Trudeau government always talks about openness and transparency, and yet this directly flies in the face of it. And so this is Anthony Housefeather, who at the time was a parliamentary secretary under the Trudeau Liberals. It should be noted that he is no longer a parliamentary secretary. Sometime after this committee evidence, PACP 50 sometime after this procedure, this committee hearing, Anthony Housefeather was demoted or lost his job as parliamentary secretary. Why? I don't know. But here is what he said. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say that we here as Liberal MPs today, we are not part of the government. We are here as members of Parliament. It's trying to strike a nonpartisan tone. Not here representing the Liberal Party. I'm here as a member of Parliament representing Canadians. Secondly, we are not here to defend the pharmaceutical companies. I want to say to Ms. Sinclair Degaunay that I have not heard from any of my constituents in the last few years about these contracts. As I have said before, it is important for the committee to have access to the documents. I fully agree that this is a member of Parliament's right. I agree with what Mr. Blake said before. Everything we decide to do is because we choose to allow that to happen. We have a right to see whatever it is we want. So let's start from that premise. Unredacted documents should come to parliamentarians. Unredacted meaning not blacked out. He goes on to say, as premise number 2, I think that we all agree that we should look at the documents in a confidential location. The only difference between the amendment to the motion and the motion itself is the location. One is the clerk's office, and one is a secure location where these types of documents are normally accessed. I don't think that's a big difference. We're just saying that parliamentarians can access it in a location that is close by. I don't think we should fight about that. I think it is reasonable. I think it is a reasonable request based on what the contract says to just have it done there. Then we get to the real issue, which is the issue of the NDAs, short for non-disclosure agreements, meaning you can look at it, provided you signed an NDA, and then keep it all secret to yourself or only discuss it with others who have signed an NDA. And he goes on, I am in agreement that normally members of Parliament should not be asked to sign non-disclosure agreements to access contracts, particularly commercial contracts. He claims to be in total agreement. However, he goes on to say, these are agreements that exist. They're not agreements that we're about to negotiate. They were already negotiated. These agreements require employees of the Government of Canada who access these documents to sign confidentiality agreements. So what he is saying is that when they negotiated these contracts with the pharmaceutical companies, it was part of the process in negotiating out these contracts that non-disclosure agreements be required of anyone who wants to view them. Now, was that a requirement of the government, or was that a requirement of the pharmaceutical industry, or was it mutual? He doesn't say. And then he goes on. Why is that? Why are there many more redactions, as my colleague said, in these documents than in other documents? It's because these documents were signed at the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was desperate for vaccines. I will take exception to that right off the bat. Everybody means everybody. The fact of the matter is, millions of Canadians were not desperate for vaccines. If everybody was desperate for a vaccine, again, no need to mandate the shots. No need to say no jab, no job. No need to say no jab, no travel. If everybody was desperate and couldn't wait to roll up their sleeve, then there's no need to bring in draconian measures to force people to comply. But that's not the route they went. Companies were being told to rush vaccine production and to do testing in an unprecedented way, in a way that they don't normally do it. So right now we're here, we have a parliamentary secretary, Anthony Housefeather, member of the governing Liberal Party of Canada, saying that these COVID vaccines were, that the government told them to rush vaccine production and to test in an unprecedented way, and in a way that they don't normally do it. How many times did we hear from the mainstream media that this was developed? Yes, it was developed faster, but it was developed in the same manner. Not according to Anthony Housefeather. He's saying it was done in a way that that pharmaceutical companies normally don't do it. See, I've invested in biotech stocks before. And so because of that, I have a degree of familiarity. I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but I have a degree of familiarity with the manner in which the clinical trial process works, even if you're dealing with a long established platform, something that's been around for years, not like mRNA that they've been working on for 20 plus years and never gotten a single product out of. Even if you have a platform that has rendered numerous other products, it's still, you have to do preclinical work. You have to perhaps do animal studies. And then after that, a phase 1 safety trial is designed, submitted to regulators. The regulators review this phase 1 safety trial. If they deem it acceptable, they say, okay, go ahead, you can start your trial. Participants are recruited. It can be very short in duration. It can be a few weeks, maybe a couple months. Might be a very small number of people. Under 100 is not uncommon. Even a dozen or 2 dozen is not uncommon in a phase 1 safety trial. When that phase 1 is done, the results are then poured over. And if everything goes well and there are no safety flags raised, then a phase 2 trial is designed, and a phase 2 trial seeks to prove efficacy, that the drug works. And and then after that comes a large phase 3 trial designed to prove that a drug or a pharmaceutical agent product should be approved, authorized for human use. Well, according to Anthony Housefeather, companies were being told to rush vaccine production and do testing in an unprecedented way, in a way they don't normally do it. So that immediately shoots the whole argument that it was done the same as any other vaccine or any other pharmaceutical product. Not according to me. This is according to Parliamentary Secretary Anthony Housefeather, former Parliamentary Secretary. Again, sometime after this committee hearing, he was demoted. These companies were exposed to a way higher liability in putting their products on the market than they normally would be, because they didn't have the type of testing that normally means these drugs take years to come to market. They did it all in less than a year. That's why these companies said that if they were going to deliver this product that they hadn't tested in their normal way, they wanted to have different conditions. Also, with countries around the world competing with each other to get these, the countries had less leverage than they normally do. For example, if we were entering into flu vaccine or monkeypox contracts or other things that are normally available, this would be a different issue. However, these are already signed, saying, but now, that was 2020, in early 2020, that's when these contracts were signed, and he's speaking in 2023. So he's saying, it's too late, too bad, so sad. They were signed at a time, he goes on to say, they were signed at a time when the government didn't have that leverage in negotiations. We just wanted to sign as many vaccine contracts with as many producers as possible because Canadians were desperate for vaccines. Again, a blanket statement, like you said earlier, everybody. And were some Canadians desperate for vaccines? Yes. Some were terrified of COVID. And if it had been developed in a week, they probably would have taken it, I imagine. But not everyone was. Millions were not. In the end, it worked out, according to him. We got vaccines, and we were one of the countries that got to vaccinate everybody the fastest. These are the terms of the contract that people accessing the information are supposed to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. What will happen if we don't? Well, then theoretically, there would be a right of action by the pharmaceutical company against the government of Canada. What would happen if Canadians saw that, I wonder? What would happen if we saw those contracts? He intimates going on that then the government of Canada could be sued by the pharmaceutical companies. Why would the pharmaceutical companies, what's in those contracts that is so egregious that it would warrant a lawsuit? He goes on to say, is that worth the potential liability to taxpayers that parliamentarians see it without an NDA? That's up to everyone on the committee. I personally don't see such a difference. I would be happy to sign an NDA to see the document. Again, I let everyone decide where their line is crossed, because as Blake said, it's a question of a line. What is the liability that we want to potentially put on Canadian taxpayers to follow the principle of seeing a document without an NDA? That's why we proposed this amendment. We thought it was reasonable, but I'm happy to hear other views on it. And again, I'm going to end the sharing there. And if you want to view those documents, if you want to view the article on the use of the Emergency Measures Act or the Emergencies Act, on the federal court ruling that it was unreasonable and in violation of our, the rule of law, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If you want to read that article, I'll post that up. It was in, I think it was the Edmonton Journal. The excellent video that tugs at my heartstrings. It all comes down at the end of the day to fear. So many Canadians were afraid. Many Canadians were not. And those who were not afraid, it was those who were afraid who wanted to dictate to those who were not. Well, you can't protest as it's your legal right because I'm afraid. You can't go into a coffee shop or work or get on an airplane and go visit a dying relative because I'm afraid. And that's all I really wanted to say. I'm looking back on the convoy, and it was a special time. It was a good time. It was a good time. I sometimes think of the COVID era, and especially in the months leading up to February of 2022, when that convoy rolled through. I look back on that time as a very dark time, like a nightmare, but that the convoy brought a ray of sunshine and a ray of hope at an otherwise bleak period in Canadian history. It showed Canadians, a lot of Canadians come together, those who rejected fear and fought back against that fear. So God bless. And again, if you want to like, and if you want to subscribe, I do these fairly frequently. When I want to share my screen, I have to upload it. I have to use some software that when I do live videos where you can comment alongside of me, those I can't share my screen. So in a case like this, where I wanted to show that document from Anthony Housefeather from the Government of Canada's own website, the article from the Edmonton Journal, and the video that just reminds me of how joyous that time was. Even though I wasn't there, I wish I'd gone. I knew the neighbors, pastor friend from Western Ontario, another pastor friend from Peterborough, Ontario, another friend from Pembroke area. I know a number of people who were down there, and I had so many conversations with them. And it was sad to talk to the people who shut it down, I'm afraid. Well, you're afraid, be afraid. Not everyone is. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.